going on, Jeromes? So the 2023 season was interesting for the Minnesota Vikings. Injuries, fumbles, woulda, coulda, shoulda, all that stuff. But given some time to sit back and think about it, because the Vikings were not in the playoffs. You have to look back at the season, and yes, we gave Kevin O'Connell some criticism in the middle of the year, especially when they gave it away. Now, some very winnable games, but question is, given the circumstances, did the Vikings, who finished 7-10, did they overachieve in 2023? All right, so going through, the first stanza of the season, the 0-3, 1-4 start, where the Vikings really gave it away against the Bucs. They literally fumbled it away. That was the Ed Ingram, Kirk Cousins fumble, where it's like, as soon as I saw that play, where Kirk Cousins was coming back from center and Ed Ingram just tipped it as he was pulling, I kind of thought that this season was going to be FUBAR. I was like, that's an omen from the football gods that this thing is not going to be good. And then, all right, but the Bucs ended up winning the South, so whatever. And then the Eagles game was eminently winnable. And the Vikings, the only time in the first part of the season where the Vikings got their asses kicked was at the start of the second half. And part of that was momentum, where JJ extending the ball for the pylon, him fumbling, and really it turned into a 10-point swing. More than that, a 17-point swing on the opposite sides of halftime. Also, you had the Madison fumble in this game. It was just, the Eagles we said at the time, the Eagles were flawed. And the Eagles, even though they started out 10-1, they were a flawed team. And the Vikings could have got them on Thursday night. That's frustrating. The Chargers game, this was such a stupid game where, the Hockenson fumble early, which was a hallmark of the Vikings early on of the season, just all the fumbles. So, the Hockenson fumble early, the Caleb Evans interception, which turned into a Josh Palmer touchdown, and then the Hockenson drop late, which ricocheted and turned into an interception. Now, a lot of people criticize Kirk at the end of the game. Why didn't you clock it? Why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? You had one of the best tight ends in the game. You had the ball right here in the end zone. There's a little bit of mustard on that thing, but you still got to secure that. Panthers got a dub. Vintage Harrison Smith game where he had 3 sacks. It was great. Also had a defensive touchdown. The Chiefs, the Chiefs game was eminently winnable, and the entire first half, the Vikings were in control, and this was the game where Travis Kelce also got dinged up, but then he just rose like a phoenix, as he wanted to do. Maybe he wasn't hurt. Who knows? But the Vikings were in it towards the end. Yeah, it should have been defensive holding on future Viking L'Jarius Sneed, and then he took his helmet off, which affected field position at the end, but it is what it is. All right, so starting off 1-4. Then the Vikings reel off 5 straight wins. They survive against the Bears and Tyson Badgett time. And then Kirko looking fantastico against the Niners. Now, San Francisco, without Debo, but we forgot to mention, of course, the hamstring for JJ against the Chiefs. So JJ goes down, doesn't play again until the Raiders game, but the Vikings are able to manage. They beat the Niners. Jordan Addison has a bust-out game, and that it was peak Kirk Cousins. Kirk Cousins winning in prime time, get the top 10 chain, beating the NFC representative in the Super Bowl. It's fantastic, man. Vikings should have beat both teams in the Super Bowl. That's what's frustrating about this year, man. Then up at Lambeau, beating the piss out of the Packers. Jordan Love peeing a little bit, and Kirk Cousins looking like peak Kirk Cousins. But then popping that Achilles, it's so frustrating, man. It's just really, really frustrating. Where the Niners and Packers game, when the Vikings had gotten to 4-4, 4-4 want some more, you're thinking, okay, here we go, the most dangerous 4-4 team in NFL history. And I believe it. I truly believed it, and it was big props to Kevin O'Connell for winning 3 straight games without Justin Jefferson, and Kirk Cousins was playing at an MVP adjacent level. Just that one step. Unfortunate, man. The Vikings did reel off 2 more wins. Now, Jaron Hall had the first 2 drives against the Falcons, and just could have been it, man. But the Passionate came in and just completely rallied this team. He had turnovers all over the place, but he was out there just drawing up plays in the dirt, not even knowing his teammates' names. And he looked good against the Falcons. He looked great in the first half against the Saints. But then the Vikings puckered up, and then they tried to give that Saints game away. That's what's rough. The Broncos game, I mean, the defense had been a big reason why the Vikings went on that 5-game winning streak, but that last drive at the end against Russ and Cortland Sutton, and this is the game where the passionate, I mean, Kevin O'Connell had his razzle dazzle. It's like, ooh, third down for what? I'm going to have Hawkinson under center, or Hawkinson at quarterback, and he's going to pitch to Josh Dobbs. That's our creativity. And then Dobbs, I'm pretty sure Dobbs got concussed on that cheap shot by Kareem Jackson. He wasn't the same. He was hesitant. He was tentative the rest of the way. Yeah. And then the Bears game plan was, quite frankly, the worst offensive game plan I've ever seen. And you're completely boxing in Josh Dobbs. You're completely taking away what makes him good, which was this running. You're trying to turn him into a pocket passer, which he is not. And the just ineffectiveness was just maddening. And I do think that, again, it's really hard to completely change the offense midseason, but I truly believe that if the Vikings had gone all in on what Josh Dobbs does well, getting him out on the perimeter, some read option, some RPOs, and just utilizing his legs, that the Vikings would have had a shot. But they didn't. Even though they rolled with Dobbs after the bye. They had that Bears game where Justin Fields had 17,000 screens. And then also, I mean, you had 2 defensive takeaways in the fourth quarter where Flores' defense really stepped its ass up. And Kevin O'Connell, 1 first down and you win the game. But you run Madison straight up the middle twice, which the Bears have shown that they could shut down. And then some Lulu screen on third down is just stupid, ridiculous. Very frustrating, right? So this is when we started getting frustrated with Kevin O'Connell. The Broncos, second half of the Saints, the Broncos, Bears, the Raiders game where he scored 3 points, and then the Bengals game, right? But they rolled with the passion after the bye. Now, hindsight is always 20/20, but you should have just named one starter the rest of the way and built your offense around him, whether it's Mullins, whether it's Dobbs, whether it was Jaron Hall. But, I mean, Kevin O'Connell didn't do it. And I really don't like the way that he played musical chairs at quarterback, but yeah, again, that's Monday morning quarterback stuff. But the Raiders, you win 3-0. The dumbest game in NFL history. It really was, man. But getting a win, great. The last win of the season. How did you win 1 out of the last 7 games? Lose 6 out of 7 to finish the year. That's what's frustrating, man, because even though this was a lost season, I mean, the Vikings were 83% to make the playoffs after the Saints game. They were still 50-50 headed into the Packers game, December 31st, New Year's Eve. But the Raiders game was tough because, I mean, the Flores defense, what Flores did with largely the same personnel from last year is pretty damn amazing. But, I mean, they just capitulated, and you hated the play calling, especially in overtime, the back-to-back tush pushes. And then the Lions game, which is eminently winnable, with Nick Mullins out there slanging it. The Packers game was just, whatever. I mean, that's a no call, no show. And then the last Lions game was also just sort of whatever in that spot. So, I mean, it's very frustrating, but you could say that the Vikings did overachieve this year because you had half the season without Kirk Cousins, who was playing at a high level. You had a big chunk of the season in the middle of it, 7.5 games without Justin friggin' Jefferson, right? And I do think that Kevin O'Connell did a great job in the middle of this season, really pulling this thing out of the doldrums, where they did win 5 out of 6 games between week 4 and week 10, but you almost can't chalk everything up to injuries. It would be like, oh, injuries. But early on in the year, it was turnovers. And later in the year, I think it was head coaching decisions, and I think it was play calling. But it is what it is. And should this team have done even worse? Probably. Because the defense, like we said, what Flores did was alchemy. And largely, it was a lot of smoke and mirrors, but it was effective. Towards the end, injuries mounted up. Murphy missing the last 3 games was huge. But the whole thing about it is that they did what they could. They didn't make excuses. Yes, they gave away some very winnable games at the end, but I think overall, I mean, take this team right after the Kirk Cousins injury against the Packers week 8. So the Vikings still would have been 4-4. How many? If you did 1,000 simulations, like what's the average record for this team? without JJ for extended period of time and without Kirk Cousins, I don't know, probably like a 5-6 win team. So yeah, you could say 7-10 overachieved, and also the fact that God, they should have won the Broncos and the Bears and the Bengals games and probably the first Lions game, but this team could have easily been just as easily could have been 10-7 versus 7-10. That's how frustrating this season was, especially if you count those early games as well. But overachieve, I actually think yes. Where I know that people who would have wanted to tank and get a high draft pick, given the Vikings at the 1-4 start, maybe they just completely collapse after the JJ injury. But I think that even though yes, we did criticize Kevin O'Connell for some decision making as well as his him playing around with the quarterback position, I think overall this was a solid coaching job, and it took a while to come to that decision because of the frustration towards the end of the season, where the Vikings, they had all the chances in the world, they controlled their own destiny, they could have won the North, and they gave away eminently winnable games, but at a certain point you were just too banged up. All right, and well, it's a bit of a chicken or the egg thing. You could just blame injuries, or you could blame game management decisions for giving away very close and winnable games even with your backups. But it is what it is. And yeah, 13-4 and win the division was great. And you definitely had a degree of puck luck on your side, even though, what about point differential? Shut up. Shut your face, man. But the Vikings ran hot in single-score games 2 years ago, last year, or 2023. Not so much. But I feel like since the Vikings did have the injuries, they did have to play a lot of young players, I think that this will be a good learning experience. And whether they run it back with Kirk, whether they find their quarterback of the future, whether they bring in a bridge quarterback, whatever, they're going to suture up things in the trenches, especially along that defensive line, and they're going to give Brian Flores some better personnel. And I think that the future is certainly bright as they head into 2024, even though they lose a game to London, but they do have that extra home game versus having 9 road games like last year, as well as they play a third-place schedule. So we'll see. I think things are certainly looking up. And with O'Connell, I know we've been hard on him. I know that we talked about, well, he's coming in on the hot seat, but that's because you have expectations. And hopefully they take the lessons from 2023 and apply them going forward. And hopefully he is the next Bill Walsh. Hopefully he is the next Bud Grant. Kind of looks like young Bud Grant, doesn't he? There you go. But that's it. Your thoughts are thoughts. Did the Vikings overachieve in 2023? Let us know in the comment section below. Subscribe for daily Vikings takes. Want to support the work? Put a little something in the Venmo. But till next time, Skol, production value.